Slush is the biggest and best startup event on the planet, so that's in a couple of weeks from now. And last year we attracted over 4 trillion in venture capital. The biggest and best startup event is organized by young people. They run it, they're in charge, they make it happen. You join Slush as a volunteer, learn how to build the biggest and best startup event. And then after that, you go out and you build the biggest and best startups. And we have many, many examples. I mean, take Mickey, who was running Slush for a few years. He started Volt. Then they had 8 billion exit to DoorDash. And there are many, many examples and many more to come.
Forget the Silicon Valley mold. Innovation is exploding worldwide, with each region fostering a unique ecosystem for startups. Join us on Ecosystems, where we'll explore these hidden gems, uncovering the secrets behind their success.
All right, welcome, Peter. Thanks for joining me.
Hey, it's great to have you here.
I'm saying you're welcome, but I'm in your town.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for everything. I wanted to interview you. You know, I started off, cursing my friend for sending me to Azerbaijan, and then I managed to grab a photo with you. I'm a fan, love Angry Birds and everything from Rovio, and then we got to talking, which was great. And then now I'm here in Helsinki, Finland. Pretty cool. Yeah. Looking at trying to do something with DraperU, so fingers crossed. But I wanted to take the opportunity to talk to you about your journey, and so it's mainly entrepreneurs, just so you know, for the audience. And so I want to start, is it right that there was maybe 50 games or something like that before you kind of hit it?
Yes, 51, and then 52nd game was Angry Birds.
Right.
But I think what I think is cool about kind of like the stories is kind of like the fact that I started my entrepreneurial journey at the original tech startup. The one that Bill and Dave started in their garage in 1939.
Tell me that bit then. I'm jumping too far ahead.
No, but it's because we have the Silicon Valley connection. So basically, I started my journey there, if you will. And of course, I wasn't there, in Palo Alto in 1939, but I had a chance to meet with both Bill and Dave when they're still around.
Wow.
And I also had fantastic entrepreneurs. Because as we all know, they didn't just start HP in that garage, but that's like the birthplace of Silicon Valley. So after Bill and Dave started HP, then we've had Intel, Apple, Google, endless list of crazy success stories from Silicon Valley. And what I like about the Bill and Dave story, because it's a little bit like the Rovio story, because Bill and Dave met at Stanford, their professor suggested, okay, why don't you start a company? They went to their garage and okay, magic. And same thing, of course, happened a bit later. Also Stanford, Sergey and Larry, and then they went to Susa Wojcicki's garage in Menlo Park, and then Google happened. But I don't need to tell you you're from...
That's basically the Silicon Valley tour, right? Just go around all the garages.
Yes, totally. Yeah. But anyway, so also what happened then, Rovio, kind of like how Rovio got started, that I was actually working for HP here in Finland then, and this was 2003, and then... organized a game-making competition to make the best possible mobile multiplayer game. And the multiplayer, because at HP wanted to sell the servers to power all these games running on the Nokia smartphone that just had come out. So Nokia, that was when they were still making phones. So, there's a lesson there that first you do 40% market share and then 0. But anyway, so of course, when then these first smartphones came out, and this was many years before iPhone, Android, all of that, of course, we always need games. And then, in this competition that we organized, actually, there's a big event here in Finland called Assembly. So there's thousands of people who get together, play games, create these demos and all of that. This started with back in Commodore 64, Amiga, all of those things way back, when.
Like a big hackathon.
Yeah, exactly. But it was kind of like hackathon before hackathons and a little bit like that, but more games. So then, Niklas, Kim, and Jarno, they were students at Aalto University here, and they took part in this competition. And not only did they take part, they won it. And then they came to me because I was the organizer, I was on jury, and then they asked me that, Peter, hey, we're students here at Aalto, we won the competition, what should we do? And I said, okay, of course you should do what you love to do, so why don't you start a company to make games? And they started Rovio 2003, and then it took 6 years, 51 games, 52nd game that came out 11th of December 2009 was Angry Birds. So it wasn't the first or second or even third, but it took a few attempts.
Yeah. And so, and then like, you know, my little understanding of game development, right? It's quite expensive, right? Like when we see startups try and pitch us on games, we you know, we kind of figure they have to have like a few million or something, right? You know, a couple of million to get it going. Is that right?
Yeah, but I think that the early days of mobile, and that was actually what was kind of like very good, that it opened up the market, so you could make games with a kind of like very low budget.
Good.
So it's not like you needed to have millions and millions. Nowadays you do, because I mean, it's not just to make the game, but it's also then like user acquisition and like getting it out there. But wasn't kind of like massive budget. So it cost like 100K or something like that to make Angry Birds, and it took 8 months. So it's not like crazy.
I'm thinking like those big games.
Totally. And of course, it's kind of like a hit and miss business. So anybody telling you that, we know how to make hit games, so it's good luck with that. So, but anyway, I think that then there was, you know, like a lot of ups and downs in the company and all of that, and I think that if we wouldn't have been successful then with the 50-second game with Angry Birds, then we wouldn't be here. So it was really kind of like a make or break.
How did you keep the momentum up 52, right? Like,
yeah, I think that, I mean, again, like in any company, I mean, if you are doing what you love to do, I think that is something that is very important. And then at Rovio, it was always about making games that we love to play ourselves. And it's not like, you know, Niklas and the guys, you know, they didn't start the company that, okay, we're, you know, going to make a lot of money. They actually started the company to do what they love to do. And then also, if you look at when Angry Birds came out, it didn't take off like immediately. So first, you know, we got to number one in Finland, so home of Nokia, not too many iPhones, so didn't need like a crazy number of downloads or anything like that. Then we had a bit of a kind of like, you know, lucky break that it was the Winter Olympics in Vancouver, 2010, and then this famous Swedish skier Anja Persson, she fell, hurt herself, couldn't participate, and then she was interviewed on Swedish TV. Said it's like super boring, you know, she's just like hang out here at the hotel, but fortunately there's Angry Birds, and okay, number one in Sweden after that. So you need, you know, even though try to kind of like eliminate luck every step of the process, but what was very important that you always, even when you do that, you always need a bit of luck. I think that is, you know, if you look at any kind of like successful company, everybody always say that, we had a bit of luck, you know.
Bit of timing.
Yeah, exactly. And timing, of course, is always pretty much everything.
I want to definitely dive deeper into that, obviously, but I'm curious, just as I'm thinking about it, was there a time when you went back to some of the games that you love playing and then trying to relaunch them now that you knew the edges?
Not really. I think that made games like in pretty much like every genre, and then one thing that is also important, it's not so much that, okay, all of a sudden learn how to make like great games. I think that's, you know, of course you get better and better and you learn what works and what doesn't work. But the biggest change was that when Rovio got started in 2003, people were making these, you know, like Java games for these like Java, you know, like phones. And the distribution was totally controlled. It was totally like monopolized by handset makers and, you know, like carriers. So even if you made great games, distribution was very difficult. So you had these guys, you know, sitting there working for Nokia, Ericsson, Motorola, who were making like phones back then. And then you had all of these people like, you know, current like AT&T and Sprint, and these guys were around. And then these gatekeepers, and they decided, you know, what is a good game and what not. So you really had to kind of like get to these guys to get distribution. And then when iPhone happened, Android happened, then, you know, like a bit later App Store. And I think that's really then democratized that part. So we got basically, okay, still gatekeepers, but at least, you know, you had like a process. So if you had an app, if you had a game, you could get distribution without having to talk to kind of like the big guys. And I think that is something that really changed the market. And then all of a sudden it mattered that, you know, good games mattered. Before that, it was kind of like, okay, if you looked at the reports, annual reports from companies like EA, then they were always saying that, and this year we launched 647 mobile games, and that was like the metric. It wasn't really about like, okay, that they made one great hit game, but it was like how many games and then how many deals they did with various, carriers, and that's kind of like how success was measured by these guys.
So that's kind of like now it's finally, you said democratization is the perfect word. So it's like now the consumer's picking which one's the best one, right? That's basically same Spotify too, right?
Totally, and I think that this is something that is again a great example. I mean, of course, if you look at what has happened with the web and like with everything that has really given everybody access. Okay, then of course, if you look at the market, then it's also we've seen massive concentration of kind of like distribution power and wealth. So it's a few companies that have been collecting most of the rewards, if you will. But at least, like in theory, you can get out there.
Yeah, so that was my next bit too, right? So it starts that way, but then it's kind of like then you have to kind of buy your way. Is that right? That's
you have to kind of like that's pretty much how you have had these like phases. So I mean, then first when we launched Angry Birds, then premium content was kind of like still a thing. So you actually, if you remember early days of Angry Birds, you paid 99 cents and then you got like unlimited updates. But then very quickly we got into like in-app purchases and then this whole free-to-play freemium model, which is now kind of like dominant design. Mm-hmm. And that's when Supercell, Ilkka and the guys also here in Helsinki, they looked at what Rovio was doing, and if those guys can do that, so can we. And they did, and they made something that's like 10 times bigger. Right. And I think that you have a lot of these kind of like phases. Then one thing that is also very interesting, that there's a lot of like success stories then that were built around, okay, not just games, but at the very first Slush event here in Helsinki, 2008, we had the guy from Vilnius, Lithuania, so Ilja Laurs, and I asked him to be there and share his story because it's really cool. So he actually started this company called GetJar. Mm-hmm. And that was like the App Store before the App Store. And then Rich Wang, I don't know if you know Rich, but he's at Accel. And then he had invested into AdMob. And he found AdMob through Mobile Monday, so this kind of like networking for mobile people that I started actually together with Veskupanen here in Finland.
That was 2000. You too?
Yeah, I started.
That was a big one. They even had that in Melbourne too.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we had it everywhere. So basically we took that to more than 100 cities, including Silicon Valley. And then Rich went to Mobile Monday Silicon Valley. Then he met the founders of AdMob. And then basically they invested, and that was his biggest exit. Then when Google bought it for $850 million. But then what they noticed, AdMob was this like, it became more Google like mobile ads. But then they noticed in early days of AdMob that, hey, there's this company, GetJar, they are buying all the ads. What is going on here? So then Rich calls GetJar, and then, the guys at GetJar pick up the phone and then say, okay, it's Rich Wang from Accel. I would like to talk to your CEO. I said, Ilja, could you get on the phone? And then Ilja gets on the phone and then says, okay, it's Rich Wang from Accel. Yeah, so like, do you have a problem with your phone, or like, how can I help you? Because back then, you downloaded these jar files, so hence GetJar to your phone, and then you had problems. So then, people called and doing customer support. Then, Rich was, no, that, like Rich Wang from Accel Partners, the venture capital company. I want to invest in your company. Right. Then Ilja was like, nah, we're profitable. We don't need any money. And you had to remember this was early 2000s. So he had never heard about venture capital or anything like that. Yeah. And then being a smart guy, then he starts like looking into this. This venture capital stuff is like pretty cool. They could like help us. And end result is that they Accel invest $8 million into GetJar. So this company in Vilnius, Lithuania, that most people never heard Vilnius. Like, where's that? And then they moved to London and then later to Silicon Valley. And then actually the first Android version of Angry Birds that we launched on GetJar, because we were trying to open up this duopoly that we have with like app stores already back then. But my point with this story, of course, is that no matter where you are in the world, even if you're in Vilnius, Lithuania, capital will find you if you're doing something that is like relevant and exciting. Because people always tell me that, oh, Peter, you have to understand that here in, I don't know, Jakarta, it's so difficult to raise money. And I say, it's difficult everywhere, and it's supposed to be. Yeah.
But you're right, and you're in a much better position too if they come knocking on your door.
Totally, yeah.
And so, all right, so you got the Olympic athlete, and then what happens then? Like it blows up?
It starts blowing up a little bit in Sweden. Then actually Apple takes note. They feature Angry Birds, and then we go to number one in like more than 50 countries and stay there for hundreds of days, which I think is still even to this day is some kind of record. And then, of course, we didn't have any marketing budget. All the money was kind of like gone. So we had to do all kinds of, we did, of course, the social and like all of that. But then we got a lot of media. We also worked with Vodafone. We worked with Sprint. We worked with, all these big guys. And they featured us in their like various campaigns. So we were actually using other people's money to do the marketing, which I think is always the best thing to do.
Absolutely.
And and then it just basically became like a big thing and kind of like a pop culture phenomenon. So it was, and we of course did everything we could to kind of like amplify and make sure that the brand was everywhere. So we had as a plan from the beginning that let's make games until we have a hit, and then we take that everywhere. And basically, we expanded into animation. We bought an animation studio, then consumer products. Okay, we didn't know anything about that, but we figured that, okay, we have a brand here, and people love it. So we actually, very early days of Angry Birds, we handmade like these first like plush toys. And then everybody, like, hey, where can I buy those? And then we actually teamed up with Commonwealth Toy in New York. So they've been in toy business for like forever. So they actually knew what they were doing, unlike us. And then we started making these plush toys. Then we had actually a kind of like big problem because we started promoting the toys in our games.
Yeah.
And of course, then this was about the time when Shopify got started. So Toby and the guys had started Shopify, and we had actually Aydin Senkut, from Felicis. So he was like super angel. Okay, now he has like a big fund. But basically, Aydin was one of the investors in Rovio, and together with Axel and Atomico. And then Aydin had also invested in Shopify and said, hey, why don't you talk to Toby and the guys, about like having your own like Shopify like store. And that's what we did. And then we also got like this kind of like warehouse set up. And then we ordered what we thought was like a lot of toys. I don't know, some tens of thousands or something, whatever we could. And then we started promoting the toys in the game. And of course, what happened that we ran out in like, 2 days or something like that.
That's crazy.
But we didn't stop the ads. So then, and this was just before Christmas. So then we started getting a lot of angry emails and phone calls and everything that, hey, I ordered this toy for my kid for Christmas. Where is it? And it's like, nowhere. And then we had to hire, I think it was almost 20 or so students from Aalto University to do customer support. And we hired them like between Christmas and New Year's that year. And then they had to work until March to clear the backlog.
Wow.
So that was like not good because, obviously if you ordered a toy for a kid for Christmas and it's like nowhere to be found, not good. But then what was kind of like a positive outcome of that like experience was that we ended up with amazing customer support, and we got lots of feedback that, hey, you guys are selling this 99-cent like game, and you actually reply to our like questions and like all of that. So it was like kind of like silver lining to that, but it was quite kind of like a big mess to get through.
Absolutely. So this is what's happening internally too, right? You must be like scaling, a small team.
We went from 12 to 850, like very rapidly. What we did is on Monday we onboarded all the new employees, and then well before like end of the week they were already productive. And I think that's also kind of like one thing that I think like a lesson there, that when you are growing super fast, then people don't have time to worry about like every little detail, and you don't complain about everything that doesn't work, but you're really focused on like, okay, let's make this happen. So I think that scaling it was not, let's say, maybe that difficult, but then of course we, couldn't like keep growing. So then we had to do the first like, reductions and that was, I think that's like a lot tougher to do. And then basically we did that and okay, then we got to do the first movie, 2016. We got that out, and
come about.
I think that we, from the beginning, that was kind of like really early days. I mean, we already had discussions. I mean, a lot of people wanted to make the movie. We talked to DreamWorks, we talked to Disney, we talked to like a lot of people. And then we ended up actually with a different model. So we funded the whole thing ourselves because we could, but I wouldn't maybe recommend doing that if you get into the movie business. But anyway, and then we had Sony basically do the heavy lifting. I mean, we had our own animation studio, but most of it was then done in Vancouver, actually.
Got it. But there is a bit of a problem if you to kind of own it, right?
Yeah.
So that's probably is that why you?
Yeah, let's say that also I would say that you can have a much bigger impact on your own brand with games and other activities than movies. Movies are kind of like not that kind of like impactful in the end, because movies, like they come, of course, like then, big hit or not, but basically, and then, but it's a very short kind of like duration. And I think that's also why a lot of people nowadays, rather than doing movies, you do like series or mini series or something like that, because then it's more of a like sustainable thing from a brand perspective. So movies.
But the movie was big.
Yeah, it was pretty big. Yeah. Not as big as the Super Mario movie now, which went over $1 billion, but
really,
so that's the biggest like game like IP based movie. But Angry Birds was the biggest one until then, so it did pretty well. So I think that we're like somewhat happy with that.
Of course you are.
Yeah.
And so the scaling, just for a bit for the entrepreneurs, right? Because it's kind of the dream. Every entrepreneur wants to go like. Yeah. We come in, there's 1 million orders or 1 million downloads, whatever. Do you just get with the team and just go, hey, this is how we want to do it. We're going to start having small teams. And how do you start thinking about?
Yeah, I think that we're quite different because, again, also we expanded and we want to make sure that the brand is everywhere. Yeah. And then we got a lot of feedback that, hey, guys, like who do you think you are? You're like a games company. Yeah. You should focus, and you should focus on games. And then I always had to say that we are very, very focused, but, different focus, not on games, but on the brand. So I said that we're very focused on providing Angry Birds branded experiences in all forms and shapes for our fans. And that's what we're doing. So again, games, animation, movies, soft drinks, funny hats, you name it. And the idea was that we wanted to make sure that you are exposed to the brand, like all the time. So basically you drink the soft drink, I should play the game, buy the T-shirt, and like you build this whole like ecosystem around the brand. And I think that then also one approach there always got, then we had a lot of like great ideas for like how to do then, various marketing activities. And then I was always, asked by the team that, hey, should we save this for later? And I said, no, let's like use everything we can like immediately, because what we very quickly learned that you did something and then it opened up even more opportunity. So we went kind of like full blast with everything all the time. And I think that was actually very, very good, because we managed to keep the brand, way up there and, be part of the conversation for years. Typically these things, few months and they're like gone, but we were there from, like when we launched the game end of 2009 until then, way into like, the movie was 2016. So you could say that we were doing pretty well for like 6-7 years. And that's, when we launched Angry Birds Space, we did that in space with NASA, obviously, on the ISS. Because it's a game about space, so of course we launched it there. And we had a lot of fun. We had Don Petty was the astronaut who was up there on the space station. Then he actually built this like real-world Angry Birds game on the space station. And the video is still there on YouTube, so you can see that. It's actually pretty cool. But then we also took over the Space Needle in Seattle, so we put like a big red bird on the Space Needle so that all these guys from like Microsoft, Amazon, T-Mobile, all these guys who have their like HQs there, they could see, this like big red bird hanging from the Space Needle. And then, of course, we amplified that all over like social media and all of that. So did a lot of these kind of things that people talked about. And also, we didn't stop there. With Angry Birds Space, we also made sure that you couldn't get in or out of Walmart without seeing the brand. We did a lot of these things. And then basically we got to nice numbers for all these games.
So is it something in the billions?
It's approaching 5 billion, I think now. But it's not. It's not the biggest. There are people who have even more. But we were the first to hit like 100 million, and that was kind of like now it feels okay, 100 million. But when I first suggested that to the team, this was like 2010. Then everybody told me that, Peter, you're crazy. Not even Tetris has gotten to 100 million. They had been around for like 20 years back then. And I think that this is also kind of like quite typical that people don't see how big the market can become. And for me, it was very clear that, okay, we're going to have billions of phones. So, of course, then having 100 million is actually, not even everybody. So, and of course, if you look at it now, that we have downloads in the billions, I mean, that's, you can't even comprehend. It's just crazy.
And what's happening in Finland, right? Because I'm talking to my wife ahead of coming here. I'm like, man, I'm sure this guy's is superhero when he's going to the restaurants and stuff. Does this become like a beacon for entrepreneurs almost?
But we have many. I mean, Angry Birds and Rovio was kind of one of these things that really showed the gaming industry here that we can become much bigger, and that's what Ilkka and the guys at Supercell, they looked at us, and then they built Supercell, which is the most successful games company ever.
Right.
And then we had already several unicorns. I mean, Supercell, Small Giant Games, and there's more in the pipeline. So it's always very important, any ecosystem, that you have role models. But then also we have seen now a lot of success stories coming out of Slush. So Slush is the biggest and best startup event on the planet. So that's in a couple of weeks from now. And last year we attracted over 4 trillion in venture capital. So it's the biggest gathering of venture capital any given time anywhere on the planet. And what is super cool about Slush, besides we organize it when it's cold and dark and slush on the ground, so it's not the Silicon Valley. It's better, much better, because it's different. And it's different because the biggest and best startup event is organized by young people. So they run it, they're in charge, they make it happen. And the way it works is that you join Slush as a volunteer a year, 2-3 years. You learn how to build the biggest and best startup event. And then after that, you go out and you build the biggest and best startups. And we have many examples. I mean, take Mickey, who was running Slush for a few years. He started Volt. Then they had 8 billion exit to DoorDash. Wow. And there are many examples and many more to come. So what we have built here is a super successful startup ecosystem. And of course, it's not just about Slush. Slush is the tip of the iceberg, but there's so much activity all over the place, all the university campuses. Their student-run everything. Students run incubators, accelerators, student-run VCs. So it's all about learning by doing. And what is really cool is that we started Slush to change the mindset. So in 2007, I gave a talk to 600 Aalto students. And I asked who wants to start a company. And then, only 3 out of 600 raised their hand. So we had to do something, because if everybody just wants to work for, Nokia, Kone, Wärtsilä, big corporations, maybe the government, the big guys just maintaining the status quo, that's super bad, because we'll have no progress. So we had to start Slush to change the mindset. And actually there was a study now 3 weeks ago where they interviewed young Finnish people. So of all young people in Finland, more than half want to start a company.
Very cool.
So it's super cool. And what we are expecting to see now is really a massive kind of growth. I mean, we already have a very high number of startups. I think that we actually have the highest number of startups per capita if you look at Finland, Estonia, Sweden, so kind of this finest Bay Area. Mm-hmm. And we also have the highest number of unicorns per capita. We have the highest number of venture, or the highest amount of venture capital invested into local startups per capita. So it's a good start. But what we are working on now is to kind of increasing those numbers dramatically. So we need growth here in Finland. That growth will come from startups. It will come from new companies. It's not going to come from kind of the established big corporations, because clearly they haven't shown a lot of appetite to grow in the last 20 years. So right now, very focused on creating growth through startups, through new companies, and that's how we're going to kind of totally change the economy and the nation.
Absolutely. So was it mainly that people putting their hand up, or was it? Do you also find that it was something like, hey, I wish I had this kind of ecosystem around me when I was doing all this stuff? Was it a bit of both?
I think that I think what is very important that we have now fantastic role models. So then people see that, hey, if that guy or those guys can build this, I can too. And I think that's very important. And then we have now a fantastic ecosystem, and it's also I think very much like Silicon Valley in that way, that there's a lot of this kind of paying it forward and giving back to the ecosystem. So we have a lot of very active, angel investors. So people who then had nice exits are investing back into the ecosystem. So we have one of the most active angel investor networks. So this Finnish Business Angels, network that we started. Actually, we trained the first business angels at I think it was the second or third Slush event, and now we have a very, very big network of angel investors. So really trying to focus on making sure that we have all the bits and pieces that we need to grow and to scale. And now we're looking at how we can kind of like scale the whole thing.
Amazing. That's pretty cool, man. So it's a Slush, Mobile Monday, Finnish Angels. So you've done your bit.
It's only getting started, but I think that there's so much more that we need to do. But I think also, I mean, for me personally, I really enjoy doing things, and that's something that, you know, for all entrepreneurs, that it's about the doing and you know, learn new things like every day. So I think it's what makes it fun. And then for me, I get to work with these like amazing young people like on a daily basis. Now, you know, also been around Europe and trying to get kind of like the same kind of spirit going. So I was in Bratislava. We had this like Slush event there. Was in Sarajevo. You know, all these kind of like more exotic places. Next week I'm gonna be in Tirana. You know, in Albania, and there's also like very cool companies coming out of there. Actually, one of the startups that the startup that won the pitching competition in the Tirana Slush event last year, Bliss, they are now relocating here to Finland.
Cool.
So we're helping some of these companies around Europe and around the world also set up here in kind of like our ecosystem, and I think that we can really help them scale a lot. So that's again, you know, a little bit similar to what Silicon Valley used to be all about.
Absolutely. So, you know, I think we had this conversation in Azerbaijan of all places, and about like, you know, the one common thing that I see when I'm talking to governments and all that, and I think you agreed was around like, you know, what's that one thing that's kind of important? And I think we both kind of thought mindset was a big part of it.
Totally.
Right? So
totally.
What do you see? Obviously, you said role models is one. How else can we get like, you know, founders around the world, I guess, to think bigger?
Yeah, I think that's one thing that we definitely need here. So I think that we need to really like have a much more and a bigger ambition. So again, and I think this is something that also like Slush has been very effective, because we managed to build the biggest and best startup event. And that really, you know, then shows that it is possible and you can do it. And if you can, you know, build the biggest event, of course you can build the biggest startups. And I think that this is something that we need here, but all of Europe needs that. And I think that is something that I've been, you know, like advocating, and wherever I go and talk to any kind of like government, I always tell them that, you know, like our job is to keep governments and old people out of the way while young people change the world.
Out of the way, is it?
Yeah. So it's super important. But I think that, it boils down to kind of like the mindset. I always talk about like attitude and ambition. So attitude, you know, here placeholder for like mindset, but it's really that you have that kind of mindset, that kind of attitude that you go out there to win and to build, you know, the biggest and best. So you have to have that ambition. And I think it's super, super important, because most of the time people are not ambitious enough. So it's again that, and you know, like other people will push you down. So you shouldn't kind of like then be kind of like too modest and all that. And of course you can go out there and you can build the biggest and best. But I think that many people then, but you know, can I really, and like all of that. And then you can like start holding back. And I think that you should just go like full blast and go for it.
Well, that's also where Slush would be helpful, right?
Yeah.
Like just having a community around you that's kind of like the crazies, right?
Yes,
the ones that
totally.
believe.
Totally.
I say the ones that default to yes. Because we all have these friends that
Absolutely.
are like, no, you can't do that. Sometimes it's your mum and your dad.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that that's very important. And that was actually at the very first Slush. There's one guy who had just moved back from, I think, the UK, and then he said that he came to Slush and you know, he didn't expect much, but then he found like building full of like crazy people, and I said, there's like all this stuff. So he decided to start his company here in Finland and not move back to the UK. And I think that you really need to have this kind of like encouragement so that you can see that, I'm not the only crazy one. There's a lot of these people who are building these crazy things and you know, going out there and making it happen. So I think that you really need kind of like this kind of like peer support, and you need to see that other people are doing these things. And I think that this is a big problem that you know, we used to have, but not anymore. But many places where I go, that there are no role models. So then they're always that, but can you build a company here, you know, in our you know, city or our like country? or do we need to move somewhere? And I always said, of course you can, but you just need to kind of like show that it's possible. And I think that nowadays there's absolutely no excuse for not doing it, and you can do this pretty much anywhere. But I think also then we need to make sure that, or you should build in places where your government doesn't take, like 10% of your company or something like that, and that happens in more and more places. So we need to be careful with that.
Absolutely. So just to close off the kind of the Angry Birds, the Rovio story, right? So then, when do you get approached by Sega? And was it and then and how were you feeling like mentally and all that? Was it time to go?
I had already left before the Sega thing, so I can't talk. But what I can talk about is that we were approached by pretty much everybody. So from the beginning to kind of like the end. So we had talks with all kind of like the normal suspects. So. All the American companies in entertainment, in games, and like all of that. But we had decided that we're not going to sell kind of like to the first company that comes knocking on the door. And from the beginning, we had this like 100 million downloads. Let's go for $1 billion in valuation, and let's not sell to the first company that comes knocking on the door. And like they all came, because we had decided we want to do the IPO. And then one thing, of course, now that then, we did the IPO and we got to the $1 billion in valuation. So that was kind of like our goal. But then, end result that a few years after that, then Sega bought all the shares, bought the whole company. So now it's a Japanese company. And of course, it would have been nicer for us to buy Sega, not this way around, but it is what it is.
And then, so what's happening now? I mean, like, is that like a bittersweet end for you?
Yeah,
or like,
I think
I'm sure there's plenty of money in the bank, but still,
I think it's again like how these things go, and I think that it's actually a nice combination. I think it's good for
great brand.
And Sega is a great brand, but they also I think they need some kind of like new blood and some new ideas and all that. So I think that it's kind of like hopefully we'll see how it goes. I mean, I think it always takes a few years to see. How it goes, but I think that maybe this is one of these where 1 + 1 is a lot more than 2. At least we can hope.
Absolutely. So, just to kind of close it off, right? Like, you're surrounded by these entrepreneurs all the time. You're doing your bit. When are you getting back on the horse? Do you think? Is there a time where you're like, are you just waiting for that spark?
I'm already. Could say that I'm already involved. 10. I have like 10 things going. So I'm definitely doing. A bit of everything. So I've done quite a few angel investments, and then I'm also a co-founder in a few companies. Now I also helping a few people in games. So there's a lot of very interesting activity starting on that side, and then working with a lot. Like would be surprised if I didn't do anything in AI. So nowadays, of course, everything is AI, including games. So there's a lot of super cool stuff happening here in Finland, and I think that I would say that you've seen nothing yet.
Good, amazing. Thank you very much for joining me, Peter.
Hey, thank you. It's great.
The future isn't built in a single place. Explore it, shape it. Subscribe to Ecosystems.